Isnin, Wahad, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, anyone. Welcome to the sixth episode of the Victor News Network. This time, sadly, there will be only 8 articles which I consider to be worthy to comment on. Main reason is that in the US, just yesterday, it was Super Tuesday, and in the past few days, at least from other points of view, not exactly much has happened in the world, as I've told you. But we will comment on other things which has kept the minds of mass media in a frenzy, particularly uh, how the Supreme Court of the United States gave Trump the right to be represented on ballots in all 50 states, and then some others, which we will explore together. Now to get back to the sponsor, the usual Matchbook Custom. If by any chance you're into Harleys and you live in the Cambridge area, but that still doesn't mean that they don't serve all of the UK, they're great people and I'm supporting them to build a community around Harleys. Start of the season event will be happening at their workshop in Stamford in Cambridgeshire on the 23rd of March. You'll find the event page on the screen and the link in the low bar. On the topic of the video, what is the real role of the USA in the world? This will be postponed for a bit as my own life has been getting increasingly crowded, but it will be done at some point when it will be done. Suggestions regarding videos and other things that may come into your mind or things that you may want to see are accepted via either the comments or on this video or on via email at thehonestjew1.com, as you can see it posted on screen, or on X. The handle is at thehonestjew1. Might I remind you, please like and subscribe this video, share it with people that you think they may find it interesting. It means a lot to me, especially to bridge this barrier in the beginning with the low numbers, which also don't translate into quite low visibility. As usual, links and timestamps of our articles are in the description. Starting first with a trip down the memory lane, the thing that has occupied the minds and the mass media for an unnaturally long amount of time. Wall Street Journal. It's official. We can pretty much treat COVID like the flu now. Here's a guide. This is going to be interesting. New guidelines from the CDC Friday bring COVID precautions in line with those of other respiratory viruses. A case of COVID no longer means isolating for 5 days, according to the latest guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released Friday. It's the latest sign of the virus's normalization 4 years after it upended our lives. You should now follow the same precautions with COVID as you take with the flu, according to new guidelines from the CDC. That means staying home until you've gone a day with no fever and symptoms start to improve. Take other precautions for the next 5 days, including wearing a mask and limiting close contacts with others. Those are the same steps the CDC recommends for other respiratory viruses. COVID-19 is still an important public health threat, but it is not the emergency that it once was, said Dr. Brendan Jackson, who leads the respiratory virus response for the CDC's National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Disease on Friday. And its health impacts increasingly resemble those of other respiratory viral illnesses, including influenza and RSV. Plenty of Americans dropped COVID testing and isolation periods long ago as the virus became more routine. Many schools and workplaces hadn't been enforcing their stricter CDC guidance, and some states have already relaxed their COVID guidance. Many doctors say that at this point, common sense should guide you. If you feel sick, stay home. When you're feeling well enough to go out but still have some symptoms, it's a good idea to wear a mask indoors to protect others. Be more cautious if you're going to be around more vulnerable people, such as those who are immunocompromised or elderly. Even if you're not worried about health risks, there's still the disruption of getting sick. So, if you have a big trip coming up, an important job deadline looming, or you just don't want to juggle work and a sniffly kid, adjust your precautions to fit your tolerance level. Just like the flu, COVID-19 hospitalization and death numbers are still higher than those of the flu, but the gap has narrowed since earlier in the pandemic. However, public health officials caution that the cough still isn't the same as the flu and other respiratory viruses. Let's be clear, COVID-19 is not the flu, said Jackson at the CDC. It still causes more serious illness and leads to more lasting effects, he said. Public health experts and physicians know that the cough is still a disease that is cited as a cause of death in more than 1,000 people a week, according to CDC data. And long COVID, with symptoms that can linger months and even years, hasn't gone away. The CDC's relaxed cough guidelines don't apply to healthcare settings, including nursing homes. People who are at higher risk for severe illnesses, such as the elderly, the immunocompromised, and pregnant women, should see a healthcare professional if they feel sick to get tested and potentially treated. What your symptoms mean. The CDC's latest guidance underscores that you're most contagious early in your illness. We want folks to recognize that the majority of virus spread is happening when you're sickest, and as the days go on, less virus spreads, said CDC Director Dr. Mandy Cohen. However, assessing your symptoms isn't a foolproof way to tell how contagious you are. In general, asymptomatic people are less likely to spread the virus, but it is possible to spread it without having symptoms, said Deepta Bhattacharya, a professor of immunology at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Tucson. When you are coughing and sneezing a lot, you tend to be more infectious because you are emitting lots of viral particles in the air, but you can still spread it simply by breathing without coughing or sneezing. Cough in general doesn't usually cause a lot of fever, says Dr. Julie Parsonet, a professor of medicine and infectious disease doctor at Stanford. So, the absence of a fever isn't a dependable sign that you are cough-free or that you aren't contagious. At-home rapid tests aren't always reliable either. So if you test negative but you still have symptoms, you should test again in a few days. The bottom line, says Parsonet, is that you should try to protect your family, friends and colleagues when you are sick, no matter what you have. Stay home if you feel ill. If you have a runny nose and cough, test yourself and wear a mask, she says. When to go out? Dr. Peter Chin Hong, infectious disease specialist at the University of California, San Francisco, says it is reasonable to follow more relaxed isolation guidelines. Now, many of us have been infected and reinfected and gotten vaccinated at least once. Our immune defenses against the virus are stronger, he notes, and we have more tools to fight it if we do get sick, including antiviral medications. How often to vaccinate? Most people should get a cough vaccine once a year, likely in the fall around the same time as you get your flu shot, to bolster your immune defenses for winter when cases rise. Older people should get vaccinated more often. The CDC this week urged people 65 years and older to get a spring booster at least 4 months after their last dose. About 60% of seniors aren't up to date on their cough shots. People with compromised immune systems should be allowed to get a cough shot whenever their doctors advise, spaced 2 months apart as the CDC recommends. Oh, this being the first article, and since this will be the most likely the third time when I will begin rambling on the first topic as we begin this podcast, let's just start with the very beginning. Me, as well as my colleague from the sofa back in Romania, but also many other people, have been saying such things, some as early as 2021. And there were really smarter people who would read the analysis and also all documentation related to symptomatology and also the beginnings of the treatment protocols have essentially reached the same conclusion back then. It's just a cough, bro, nothing serious. You treat it just like the flu. But as we know, things didn't end up that way. Almost the entire planet went on lockdown in essentially starting around March 2020. Even though I would personally look the other way if the lockdowns would have simply stopped at being a single one and to last at most 2 weeks to a month indulgently, we all know that wasn't the case. Most of the countries had more or less the same approach, and when I mean most of the countries, I mean most of the countries in the civilized West and those who look into the civilized West for such guidance in order how to approach the situation with the cough itself. And as we know, it's the measures have been from countries who couldn't exactly afford pandemic measures. See, for example, African countries. Well, the cough simply just didn't exist. And for countries which tend to have, for whatever reason, a fetish towards keeping old people to get as old as possible. Take, for example, Italy, because at least in the case of Europe, that's where most of the people got their approach example from. Things turned out the way they did, and I would say it again, but some of you may already know this, the damage that was caused not by the pandemic itself or by the virus himself, but the measures that were taken in order to control the so-called spread. And even if the control and the measures were the way they were, they didn't exactly solve the issue because people still died. And it's not just that people still died. We could simply get back to information that has existed even early in the pandemic regarding things like who exactly is the most affected by a virus like the cough. Well, it happened to be mostly old people, and even those old people, if I am to remember, back in the beginning of 2022 or late 2021, CDC itself released a statistic that when it came to mortality itself, or more like the survivability, that was exactly their statistic. Well, the most vulnerable group that came out of that statistic happened to be exactly people who were 65 years and older. And of course, just like with any disease, it doesn't even have to be the cough. Everybody who's had old parents or grandparents, and at least you visited them regularly, uh, almost it's common knowledge that diseases, when you are at a much older age and progressing year by year, at the baseline, you're still more vulnerable to them compared to how you were vulnerable if when you were younger. Although, yes, there are some differences. But here we're not treating exceptions as the rule. Of course, everybody had probably a grandparent, or they know the grandparent of a family member or of a friend which managed to live up until late 80s, early 90s. Some even managed to live almost a century or even older. Sure, that still happens, but here we are discussing about the statistics that they themselves have posted. So the survivability ratio, to get back to my point, for the most vulnerable group was about 98.75% or thereabouts, but it was surely in 98%. And here we're not even going to discuss what exactly was the survivability ratio for anybody who was younger than the age of 65. One of the greatest panics was related to, oh my God, but how is this going to affect infants? And there have been several instances where experiments have been done on infants with the vaccines. By infants here, that were, according to the same statistic, there were kids between ages 0 to 4, and the virus just simply didn't affect them. At a statistical level, it definitely did not affect them, and this was exactly the case with almost everybody up until you reached the magic old age. When we look at these things, not to mention the amount of lying that was done for many interests. Some people lied in order to get grifts from a government related in one way or another with the pandemics. It doesn't matter if it was masks or rapid tests or vaccines themselves. Just if we are to look at in the case of the EU, best example being the controversy that the current Politburo Commissar of the EU SSR is going through and has been going through since late 2021, early 2022, when she's the one that signed the vaccine contract with Pfizer, and it's a contract worth almost some hundreds of millions of euros. Well, okay, that's one thing. But there were also many people who were useful idiots who swallowed the panic that was sown through the press or by special interest groups, whether they were naive or they were trying to sell an idea for their own interests or for their own grifts. And and it's not just that. If you fell for the panic, that's okay, as long as you come quickly to realize at some point that things are not exactly the way they are portrayed. But in that instance, that wasn't exactly what happened. Let's remember that there were many people, sadly, who not only went absolutely psychotic and started seeing everybody on the street as a potential enemy that could infect them. Take, for example, people who chose not to wear masks, even in places where masks were not mandated. That's irrelevant. Let's not forget people who went on social media and asked for really punishing measures against people who would not do the current thing when it came to the pandemic, whether it started with masking, whether it continued with testing, whether it continued with vaccination, and that's where things really went downhill when it came to the breakdown of society. Those people still are out there, which is why my colleague from the sofa recommended at that point, since the topic of the cough was a thing that he covered both on the Romanian podcast, especially when it came to things related to the way the pandemic situation was being handled in Romania, but me and him as well, we've also commented on the things that happened in other places in the world. Australia and New Zealand managed to beat every other country by far when it comes to the sheer insanity of the measures. But to continue and regress a bit. People have been saying that it's just a cough. There is no reason to panic. There is no reason to destroy our economies, and definitely no country needed blanket measures on applied to the entire population, especially nowhere to the level to which they were imposed with having arbitrary lockdowns. I personally remember living in Cluj at some point. The state changed the way they started counting the cases. They started implementing some sort of 2 week average, and depending on what the apparent infection rate was, the shops would close earlier and earlier. They first started shutting down at 10 if you were in the green zone. If you were in the yellow zone, they would have started closing down at 8. And if you were in the red zone, the shops would just simply close at 6. But that doesn't mean that people still weren't out. And when the state obligated shops to close at 6 because apparently too many people are coughing, there were still other places where you could still buy stuff. And guess what? Those places got really crowded. Personal example, but I'm pretty sure the others can relate to this as well. Petrol stations, for example, were an exception to the rule because they were not exactly a retail unit and they represent an essential business. Well, who would have thought in the instance when you close shops way too early, you're going to have people crowding at the very few places that are open, even though you would have to pay a significant premium because things in the petrol station cost significantly more than they do in a normal retail shop. I've personally been part of queues in that time interval where out of, say, 20 people that were waiting at the queue, about 2 to 3 people out of those were specifically there to fuel their cars. The rest were just people who just wanted to buy shit, which now they couldn't because yeah, the state said that oh my God, you're coughing too much, shut it down, shut down retail places, and the measures themselves, as you can surely know and remember, went to absolute lunacy. In the European Parliament, there was a measure to start restricting working if you didn't have the green pass, which shows that you were vaccinated. All the entire debate about vaccination and exactly what sort of vaccines were used and how they acted, that's also another can of worms, which still is going underway. And Pfizer is in big trouble, both in the US and overseas, due to the vaccine itself and also all the side effects that the vaccine caused. Part of it because of the way it's made. Here I'm talking about the mRNA part of the vaccine, which is something completely different than the other traditional vaccines. Whether here we talk about AstraZeneca, whether we talk about what was that one called, Johnson and Johnson. On the topic of the vaccines, even though they appeared very quickly, going way beyond what normal vaccine development guidelines were, even if they've been cut down by the CDC and other state healthcare institutions regulating such things, it was still not exactly as safe, but it was marketed as safe, it was marketed as necessary. Everybody remembers that since the measures were more or less the same in a lot of countries on the planet, how many people of you watching or listening to this remember, well, the vaccine is safe because it was made by experts who know how to develop a vaccine? How many public health officials have told you that well, in order to get out of the lockdowns, we all have to vaccinate? when and when when inevitably issues appeared and a lot of questions ended up being asked about how safe are the vaccines exactly, and there's not even yet to the part where a lot of statistics have been intentionally buried for quite a while, or statistics have been manipulated relating to side effects because it simply went against the state or the national propaganda. On Only after the pandemic, this discussion, once the shock of the war in Ukraine starting faded away, there are still lengthy debates carried out within societies about the pandemic itself and about the way it was handled, which in a lot of cases is not something great. It was handled quite horribly, and that's saying something. Also, the heavy-handed measures applied by the state in one way or another. I'm talking here about the lockdowns, the the sheer manipulation for you to get vaccinated, the sheer lies that have been said about the safety of the vaccines, and of course, in order to maintain the lie, intentionally suppressing data that the vaccines are not exactly that safe. When it comes to instances such as how the pandemic was treated in Eastern Europe, well, Eastern Europe was actually pretty lucky because the way the societies are there, they're not exactly as high trust as they are in Western Europe or in the rest of the Western world. And that had the great benefit of not having consistent implementation of the pandemic rules. And that was actually a good thing. State employees suddenly remembered that, especially at the local level, that whatever the central government in some capital, fuck knows where, says, they're still part of the same community. And when you go overboard into doing whatever the central state dictates you to do, whether here we're talking about absurd fines, such as yeah, the most relatable example that I can give right now is with Romania. At the beginning of the state of emergency, that was also another insane thing. You put the military on the streets in order to control a cough and to lock people down, and in order to not keep them to move. There were fines of about 2,000 plus euros, which were given to people because because they, for example, they went to buy bread at the wrong time, or there were or in most cases there are even people who've been fined who haven't exactly been caught doing something and going against the rules. Thank God that in such instances, at least the judicial system functioned most of the time. But here I also bring another example. In the UK, there have been plenty of people that have been fined the full £10,000 for allegedly uh, breaching lockdown rules or not respecting the rules related to managing the pandemic, the so-called endangering of public health measures. Then that was absolutely crazy. And and here we're just talking about what ended up happening as the pandemic was going on. If we are to talk about all the other consequences due to the measures, again, whenever you hear that that well the economy is doing bad or this job sector is doing bad because of the pandemic, well, no, that's false. It's not because of pandemic, it's because of the measures that were implemented due to the pandemic. How does it happen, for example, that Sweden, with all its issues in Europe, uh, didn't manage to implement pandemic measures, and they were about the only country, well, with the exception of Bulgaria, that managed to still do reasonably well, while everybody else was going crazy. How did it happen, for example, Bulgaria being in a political gridlock during the entirety of the pandemic? They went through, if I remember correctly, three or four voting cycles within the span of 2 years and a bit, up until they managed to elect a sort of, that is what something that resembles a stable parliament. They couldn't implement any pandemic measures because there was no government to implement them. And lo and behold, things in Bulgaria were actually going pretty well. I would know this because if you are to go on the Freedom Alternative channel, Lucian, and another guy, we went to Bulgaria when the pandemic was apparently still going on, when apparently you needed a green pass in order to cross the border, and in order to get the green pass, you had to also be, in theory, vaccinated and also tested in the past 48 hours. But in reality, that shit didn't happen. So, to carry the point home, someone has to pay for all of this. The destruction in order to save grandma from living up until the age of 85 years and 6 months to get for her to get to 85 years and 9 months. The damage is immeasurable. The damage is everywhere. You don't even have to look too far in order to see it. In any country, the harsher the measures were implemented, the worse off the economy and the society is doing. Look at Italy, for example. Italy didn't they didn't have a great economic situation before the pandemic. If you are to remember when whenever in economic discussions at the EU level, the southern European countries are mentioned, they're called the pigs states, and they all have the same characteristics. Their economies are unstable, they're heavily in debt, and in general, they're also not in a great situation from when it comes to political stability. For whatever reasons, that depends on which country we refer of. But this is not the point of this discussion. Look at how bad Italy was doing before the pandemic, and look how bad they're doing it right now. When you get to the level where Romanians come to remember here, a lot of Romanians worked in Italy ever since 2007 when Romania became part of the EU. When a lot of said Romanians left Italy because it was no longer lucrative to work there because of ever ever smaller salaries, ever greater inflation, and ever increasing cost of living expenses. You ended up having the reverse phenomenon of you have Romanian tourists that go to Italy, and then they say, well, Italy is surprisingly cheap right now compared to compared to the costs Romanians are accustomed with when they go to Western Europe. Sure, there are some exceptions, but here we're not talking about exceptions. Here we're talking about the norm, and this is not. This hasn't happened exactly because apparently the country known as Romania has gotten surprisingly richer into some in one way or another in the past few years. While that is also partially true, the other side of this coin is that the Italians have gotten significantly poorer, and they've gotten significantly poorer not because of the current government. The current government has much bigger issues to face. One of which is the judicial reform, which has been something that has been overdue by decades, come here, I'll remind you that Italy is one of the very few countries on the planet where your children and your grandchildren uh, inherit cases which are still being judged today, even though the said people which were part of the lawsuit in one way or another, they've been dead for quite a long time. Also, the current migrant situation is also something that isn't exactly getting resolved at a judicial level because the justice system has been in a gridlock for such a long time and procedures have been uh, absolutely absurd, and you will come to think in that they've been intentionally made like that to protect, of course, a lot of interest groups, and overall a pretty shit deal. We move on to give other examples of other countries which have gone the same way. Look at, for example, Portugal. Portugal also had quite restrictive pandemic measures. They were also another country that weren't doing too great before the pandemic. Kind reminder, Portuguese people have managed to find out that that it is not only cheaper, but it is also more lucrative to live and work in Angola rather than live and work in Portugal, where in Portugal it's an absolute paradox of living there. Your salaries end up being worse than the average Romanian salaries, while expenses are, of course, at the Western European level. Now, if you live in Lisbon or in Porto, your rental prices are even much higher than they used to be because there's been an influx of people from overseas, especially for example Russian citizens who have sufficient money, but they also had their own ways to immigrate in the EU, like for example the digital nomads. But overall, as we have seen, and when these consequences will be dragging them for quite a long time, somebody has to pay for everything that happened. It's simple as that. Consequences have to be applied to people who have advocated for all the restrictive measures, all the lying, all the intentional suppression of statistics, which is also part of lying, and of course all the deaths that they have been responsible of, whether directly or indirectly. In in the last, oh no, or in the previous, or the second previous podcast, which I commented about the the panel the panel discussion from Australia, from I think if I remember correctly, it was from the Sydney Herald. The the fact that at least the debate is happening, that's already a good start. But when you contrast how absolute lunacy the measures in Australia were, that definitely isn't enough. And this is sadly a symptom of also the population, yes, is partly to blame for simply accepting measures like these, and also accepting that well, not much can be done because they're the state, and that's also another intellectually lazy remark to make. Well, but you know that the measures weren't 100% dictated by the state, or they weren't exactly thought of by the state at all. They also used public health experts in order to think of that and to devise them. Well, what sort of public health experts. First of all, public health being in itself quite the ironic term to use, considering that how much money people have gotten bribed all over the planet by all the vaccine manufacturing companies. Doesn't matter if we talk about here about Pfizer or Moderna or well, Johnson Johnson didn't do it that much. Um, and to top it all off, the sheer geopolitical manipulation that went on. Well, the West hasn't seen this, but take for example, how much did China end up winning when they propagated Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines? Well, those vaccines didn't do absolutely anything, and personally, I'm glad that they didn't exactly demand to do anything because they've been efficient. They've been inefficient into actually solving the issue. But at least while it didn't do anything bad or it didn't do anything good, it was just something to check on the box that okay, you got vaccinated, and that was it. Compared to the true vaccines, if you can call them like that, and the myriad of issues that they caused. That's where for more than a year now, the died suddenly meme happened for a reason. You can't exactly ever convince me that suddenly when governments of countries propagated that you need to get vaccinated using a novel technology which which has never been implemented in the form of a vaccine to treat respiratory issues like mRNA technology, when the very few people who have been through mRNA technology many years before these vaccines. Here I'll give you a good example. People who suffer from that autoimmune disease called spondylitis, where it's in where, what the short version of it is, what happens when you have spondylitis is that the cartilage between your backbone vertebrae starts cementing itself. It starts turning into bone, and of course, that leads to really, really, really high amounts of pain. And it being an autoimmune disease, the best thing that you can do is to control it in one way or another. But when it comes to mRNA treatment for that disease specifically, but also many others who I don't exactly can recall right now, but I'll just stick with this example. Ever since the beginning, you are warned that, well, mRNA in the way it functions, you will definitely be more at risk of having circulatory related problems such as blood clots, such as heart attacks, such as having many more other issues, but cardiovascular issues particularly. However, when you're faced with such a disease like spondylitis, it's actually a good trade-off to risk maybe having cardiovascular issues in order to at least suppress for a while and to make the sheer pain of going through that disease more tolerable and at least slowing it down. How many of you do remember anybody within the mass media discussing about um, mRNA, especially mRNA as a vaccine for a cough? Even though here we're not even going to go into exactly how efficient the vaccines were. When you get to this level, just like this article says, that well, immunocompromised people should have vaccines every 2 months, or all people apparently needing a vaccine once every 4 months, or to have yearly vaccinations. Excuse me, but this reeks like some sort of promotion that's coming from the CDC, promotion for the same people that managed to make the situation much worse than it actually was. In a lot of cases, people who didn't need vaccines have ended up having their lives destroyed. If some people haven't died from an adverse reaction to the vaccine, especially the mRNA ones, uh, they've ended up getting disfigured in one way or another. Uh, just like how you simply look into the statistic, or even if you don't want to look into the statistic, just look into news articles in the past year and a half, and simply read how many people, how many young people have died suddenly, or they died out of having heart attacks or blood clots, or any other issues like that. To put into comparison, when you're at a young age, especially between ages 15 to 32, the chances of you having a heart attack, they are infinitesimal. They're not even a blip on the statistic. And not just me, but also a lot of other people that looked at what was happening and who could connect two dots together. mm, They've reached the right conclusion that well, at least a great part of those people which died suddenly, but shouldn't have died suddenly, they the they probably been vaccinated, and the connecting point is, well, what exactly do mRNA vaccines do from a cardiovascular point of view? And and when you look at the fact that people, for example, like athletes, ended up having much more issues. Some having lifetime issues because of the fact that they've been vaccinated, but also the visceral hatred towards athletes that haven't gotten vaccinated. Here, I remind you about the Serbian tennis player Djokovic. Well, something has to be done. This discussion should never die, and this discussion needs to be carried out until at least the people who are responsible for this ginormous damage that they've caused will pay in one way or another. It doesn't matter if they pay by losing their jobs. It doesn't matter if they pay by getting beaten on the street. It doesn't matter if they pay uh, by getting ostracized from society. But actions have consequences. If you do, if and here I'm not exactly advocating for vengeance for the sake of vengeance. But if nothing is done about these people, they're gonna take it as a message that if they got away the first time, they'll get away the second time as well. And considering that the first time, which should be told, isn't exactly this past pandemic, but there have been other instances in the past. Take for example the swine flu epidemic in 2009. If they've gotten away with implementing such oppressive measures during the cough pandemic, they're going to think that next time they're going to push the envelope and they're going to manufacture another pandemic. And these sort of people need to be kept in check. They either need to be kept in check if there's nothing that you can do about them, or they need to be taken out outright from the institutions that they stay in. Doesn't matter if they are public institutions or if they are NGOs. And yes, at the same time, there's also the issue of the pharmacology sector being also part of the culprits. At the end of the day, they still function just like any other company. They want to make money, but in what way exactly do they want to make money? Um, Pfizer currently in Europe is facing a lot of lawsuits because, to some extent, due to the corruption in the EU, they they've forced a lot of countries to buy many, many more doses than they were necessary, and in some cases, buying more doses than double or triple the level the population. Well, how exactly do you plan on defending this to to connect it with a point I made earlier when old people were the most at risk? To isolate old people would have been easy, or it would have been easier than to destroy at a mental level, not consider the entire planet, but entire countries. Give it a food for thought, and then you decide what exactly do you want to do. Moving on. Bloomberg. Wall Street's DEI retreat has officially begun. Programs once meant for people of color and women are now open to all. Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated has made a surprising change to its Possibility Summit for Black college students. It's opened the program to white students. At Bank of America Corporation, certain internal programs that used to focus on women and minorities have been broadened to include everyone. At Bank of New York Mellon Corporation, executives are being urged to reconsider hard metrics for workforce diversity. Lose them, lawyers have advised. This is what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like on Wall Street today: anxious, fraught, and changing fast. From C-suites down, American finance is quietly reassessing its promises to level the playing field. The growing conservative assault on DEI, coupled with pockets of resentment among white employees, have executives moving to head off accusations of reverse discrimination. It's not just Wall Street. In recent weeks, Zoom Video Communications Incorporated cut its internal DEI team amid broader layoffs, and Tesla Incorporated removed language about minority workers from a regulatory filing. The seemingly small changes, lawyerly tweaks executives call them, are starting to add up to something big: the end of a watershed era for diversity in the US workplace, and the start of a new, uncertain one. "We're past the peak," said Subha Bari, former head of diversity at Merrill Lynch. Wall Street has long skewed white and male, and it still does. Even an inkling that banks are retreating from DEI has some women and minorities questioning how real promises of change were in the first place. Publicly, executives insist they are as dedicated as ever. Goldman Sachs and other major US banks say they remain committed to attracting and promoting people from a range of backgrounds. Privately, however, many acknowledge that the high-profile campaign against DEI, amplified by billionaires including Elon Musk and Bill Ackman, threatens to set back what progress Wall Street has made. Recruitment programs aimed at women and minorities, a key tool for recruiting diverse talent, are being reworked. In-house affinity groups, specific workforce targets, and even board and diversity initiatives are all up for review, executives, consultants, and lawyers say. It's a remarkable turn. Less than 4 years ago, amid lofty talk of a racial reckoning and an inflection point in the wake of George Floyd's 2020 murder, America's CEOs were vowing to embrace inclusive hiring, promote minorities, and narrow the gender pay gap. Now, after the US Supreme Court rejected affirmative action at the nation's colleges, the legal assault on corporate diversity initiatives is gathering steam. The right has villainized DEI from Disney World to Harvard University as an engine of left-wing indoctrination, and the banks don't want to become a target for lawsuits claiming reverse discrimination. Wall Street has made progress toward diversity over the years. Still, the numbers are sobering. At Goldman Sachs, 3.7% of senior executives in the US are black, according to the bank's most recent report. The figure is about 5% at JP Morgan Chase & Company, and it's 8.7% inside Citigroup Incorporated. By comparison, black people are about 14% of the overall US population, and yet those statistics represent hard-won improvement for the banks over past years. The percentage of senior black executives and managers at all three fell from 2012 to 2016. Bankers and lawyers contend they have little choice but to reframe or pause new diversity initiatives and to get ahead of the blowback and potential litigation. People are all over the place, said Valerie Eric Rainford, who oversaw programs to promote black leaders at JP Morgan Chase before leaving the bank in 2019. Bank of New York, for instance, is reconsidering its decision to tie executive compensation to progress on diversity, according to people familiar with the matter. The lender has also changed the language it uses to describe its diversity and inclusion initiatives in recent months, eliminating references to specific targets around diversity and inclusion. Bank of America has tweaked some DEI programs and the way it talks about them, according to people familiar with the changes. The lender has considered ending some of its mentorship programs because they had achieved their goals and may no longer be needed, one of the people said. JP Morgan's summer fellowships for good black undergraduate sophomores is now open to all sophomore students, regardless of background. At Goldman Sachs, lawyers have advised the senior executives to remove references to race and gender in college recruitment programs, according to people familiar with the matter. They've also warned against hosting exclusive events for specific groups, such as women and people of color. Spokespeople for BNY Mellon, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs said the lenders remain committed to an inclusive workplace with people from diverse backgrounds. A spokesperson for Bank of America said the firm consistently evaluates its initiatives, but has not eliminated any bank-sponsored diversity and inclusion sponsorship programs. One influential Wall Street banker said he's observed that the way sway executives in change of diversity recruitment used to have with decision makers has diminished. Asking for anonymity to describe the recent changes, he said that colleagues who'd been willing in recent years to be open to diverse recruitment are reverting back to the way they were before Floyd's murder. US corporations are suddenly changing the way they speak about diversity initiatives. Citizens Financial Group Incorporated's latest annual regulatory filing no longer refers to a goal of having women and people of color make up at least 50% of the candidates for mid and senior level roles, Bloomberg News reported last week. The revision was among more than a dozen diversity-related edits in annual filings at large US companies this year. Rainford, who consults on diversity for companies including financial firms, said one client told her that it was wondering whether it needs to pause its diversity programs altogether. If it didn't have the conviction in the first place, it's easy to say, we're not doing that anymore, she said. For now, her client is sticking with its diversity programs, she added. Trouble keeps coming. DEI experts are keeping a close eye on a legal drama now unfolding in Miami, where a case has become emblematic of the growing backlash from the right. The Fearless Fund, which makes early investments in companies led by women of color, recently asked a federal appeals court to protect a contest it runs for $20,000 grants for businesses majority owned by black women. The fund was sued last year by American Alliance for Equal Rights, founded by Edward Blum, the conservative actors behind the Supreme Court case that ended affirmative action in college admissions in June. They claim the fund's grant contest is racially discriminatory. The outcome could affect how companies steer funding toward minority-owned startups and businesses. Meantime, Stephen Miller, the architect of anti-immigration policies under former President Donald Trump, has emerged as a key figure in preparing a hardline conservative agenda in the event Trump returns to the White House. Miller is bent on eradicating diversity initiatives in business. His advocacy group, America First Legal, has accused dozens of companies of discriminating against white men. We're at an interesting inflection point, said Anna Duarte McCarthy, former Chief Diversity Officer at Citigroup, whose CEO, Jane Fraser, is the only woman ever to lead a major US bank. Yes, many financial companies are pausing and re-examining diversity initiatives, said Duarte McCarthy, who now works as an industry consultant. But most are pressing on, and virtually no one has signaled a full-blown retreat. We're not suggesting that things stop because there's this fear factor, she said, but rather, take a look. Still, conservative activists and politicians aren't the only ones challenging DEI. So are some Wall Street workers, albeit far more quietly. The pushback inside the industry is real, according to Barry, the former Merrill executive, who now leads DEI advisory firm Seramount. She said white women ask her what opportunities their sons will have if Wall Street focuses solely on promoting underrepresented groups. Are they doing it publicly? Vocally? Of course not, Barry said. but they're doing it. And when they do it, you have to listen. What do you mean you are now quitting on diversity and inclusivity things? I remember last podcast I've been commenting on the fact that apparently to ask for competence is a microaggression and it's something racist and it's something misogynistic. Of course, the when we're talking about certain minorities, overall, this is the evidence that the DEI grift is slowly coming to an end. Peak DEI insanity, which has been coupled also with ESG funding, has reached its peak around 2022. And and yes, one of the reasons, at least in the US, as this joke is finally being slowly put to an end, it's also because the ESG grift and its close associate DEI are are slowly ending because, first of all, the cheap money era has ended with ever increasing interest rates, and yes, with shifts in the culture as well. This will come to an end in the next few years. At least it's an optimistic sign that while yes, in this article there have been a lot of people that have commented publicly, and they also approach it from a pragmatic point of view. Well, but at least you promised, but nothing ended up happening. But so that means you are not committed enough to DEI. What you were listening to were grifters in this entire situation with DEI. When the real measurement in the world is how successful your business is, if you go as a business into a direction such as this one, when no longer competence and abilities should matter the most, and you suddenly switch them to promoting people who are not made for the job itself. Just as, for example, women generally don't go into STEM fields. It doesn't matter what they are, or if they don't go into really cutthroat and high performance business domains such as banking and banking, finance, and investments. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There will always be a bunch of people within, whether we're talking about, yes, some women can perform and or some minorities can perform, but if they want to, they've always managed in one way or another to find their way into those fields. They didn't need preferential treatment. And this connects with one point I made in the previous podcast about about the relationships in at the workplace when even the naive workers who are not exactly too concerned or too interested about the politics behind diversity, equity, and inclusion at the workplace, even those uh, have gotten have gotten really suspicious and really yes start experiencing antipathy towards towards people who work with them, who are part of these privileged minorities, and you can't exactly blame them for doing that because when your policy as a company was to was to recruit certain groups of people to make you look good in the face of a few people who had too much cheap money to give you, well, that cheap money comes at an expensive price. And I'm pretty sure that, especially if this movement of dismantling DEI starts from banking and investment, they've kind of seen what other people have seen. Is that well, holy shit, we have this many people who who we've employed, and they don't work at the same level as the normal people that we generally employ. So that being, yes, white men, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with white men being dominant in the business, or is nothing bad about that. But it's also this perverse side of DEI, when its focus was, of course, on white collar jobs, middle to senior roles in corporations. I haven't personally heard of a single instance when DEI was pushed into work sectors such as transportation, for example. Why don't we have more female bus drivers or more female train drivers? So why don't we have more female truck drivers as well? Why don't we have, for example, more women or more black people working in building energy infrastructure? Well, of course, everybody knows why such measures haven't been have been even advocated for in those job sectors, because those job sectors are really hard work and they're not for everybody. And as a rule, and there's absolutely nothing wrong to admit this, women prefer to work in fields which are definitely less paid, but they also have much shorter working hours on average than job sectors where usually men go to. Here, I'm not even going to get into the minorities, because when well, I wouldn't even talk about minorities, because I know that's going to be very very controversial. But if you know, you know, and that's already good enough. But I'm mostly focusing right now in this discussion about specifically this debate of we need more women in the workplace, and the workplace is something white collar and corporate, and also a quite huge business. It, the only exceptions in the world when women go most into traditionally male job sectors, whether we talk about uh, corporate executives in industries such as banking, or whether we talk about in engineering, or whether we talk about other things which generally men go into. Well, they do that because of poverty. But as a country goes more and more prosperous, and this is statistic that you can compare as well. Look for example, how many women work in STEM in India compared with how many women work in STEM fields in Norway, for example, or in Denmark, or in the UK for that matter, or in the US. What exactly is the difference between these aforementioned countries and India? Well, in India, the poverty rate is pretty high. And if you don't want to compare it because, well, cultural differences, well, then compare the statistics of countries from Eastern Europe compared to the rest of the Western world. One of the reasons why, for example, in Romania you have a much higher proportion of women in IT. Well, part of it, yes, there was a push that came down the line from Western companies, but the vast majority of the women that went into IT was because it paid well. And a business paying a job paying well also guarantees you a certain standard of living, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when you also start looking at this. This show is absolutely nothing wrong. Well, if you can do it, well, props to you. If you understand the that yes, from this point of view, the life is still difficult, and if you take into consideration in some sort of future that you want to build a family and that you don't want your children to go through the same difficulties that you went when you were a child, especially in post-communist Eastern Europe or in the still prevalent poverty in India. There's nothing wrong with that if that is your choice. And everybody who interacted with such people, they almost never discriminate, or at least they didn't used to discriminate in the past. If, for example, a woman made her choice to work in a steel mill, for example, or if she chose to work in the IT sector. The- Aside from the fact that maybe some jokes in the office will go around, depending on yeah, things that people generally do, but this goes both ways. Men generally had no issue, but with DEI, even those who are disconnected from this topic, started having quite an issue. And to also refer to a personal circumstance of mine, I even have a bigger issue. Although I am optimistic that hopefully something will change in the UK as well from this point of view, because culturally the US and the UK aren't exactly too far. What I can hope is that by the time I get into the accounting sector, um, this DEI grift hopefully will be over by then, so that I wouldn't have to think every day and especially to look at this issue whenever I will be applying for a job to think, well, I'll try to apply for a job, but what exactly are my chances when I'm neither a woman, neither some cohabiting minority, or whether I'm some sort of interest group or some sort of other minority or other arbitrary minority, like for example the LGBT queerties. If it's not over by then, well, I already know what I'll be doing. I might as well declare myself non-binary and not discuss about this topic. If by any chance I smell a whiff that said discrimination is still there, even though at a theoretical level it shouldn't be there because there have been laws in this country since well about 2018 relating to discrimination, but the reverse discrimination is still something prevalent. It's still something prevalent, and personally, I wouldn't want to be part of it because I know that that to some level since I'm not since I don't possess a hole between my legs, or if I don't have the right skin color, somebody who is in most cases statistically less competent than I am will get a position and the aforementioned benefits that come with that job and with that position instead of me, simply because meritocracy is no longer the most important thing. Moving on now, Fox News. Ex-MSNBC host Keith Olbermann calls for SCOTUS to be dissolved for overturning Trump Colorado ballot ban. The Supreme Court has betrayed democracy, Olbermann declared. Former MSNBC host Keith Olbermann called for the Supreme Court to be dissolved following Monday's unanimous ruling against Colorado's removal of former President Trump from the 2024 ballot. The Supreme Court has betrayed democracy. Its members, including Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor, have proved themselves inept at reading comprehension. and collectively the court has shown itself to be corrupt and illegitimate. It must be dissolved, Olbermann posted on X. A follower responded, dissolve the separation of powers to save democracy? And Olbermann shot back, if the political whores on the court are overruling quite explicit language in the constitution to benefit one politician, your separation of powers died long ago. The far-left media personality also responded to a conservative who told him to cry more by declaring, those aren't tears, fascist, they're urine. I'm sure you can enjoy being bathed in it. Olbermann also said that the Supreme Court is betraying America yet again on a video posted to social media. All 9 justices ruled in favor of Trump in the case, which will impact the status of efforts in several other states to remove GOP frontrunner from their respective ballots. The court considered for the first time the meaning and reach of Article 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars former office holders who engaged in insurrection from holding public office again. Challenges have been filed to remove Trump from the 2024 ballot in over 30 states. We conclude that states may disqualify persons from holding or attempting to hold state office, but states have no power under the Constitution to enforce Section 3 with respect to federal offices, especially the presidency, the court wrote. Olbermann, the firebrand known for his stormy exits from MSNBC and ESPN, has been among the most outspoken critics of former President Trump, even moving out of his luxury New York City apartment building because it was owned by him. In 2017, Olbermann was widely criticized when his anti-Trump book featured the cover image of himself draped in the American flag, which is visibly touching the ground, a violation of the US flag code. He famously walked away from ESPN ahead of the 2020 election so he could speak out against Trump on YouTube and social media. Leaving aside this lunatic from this article, I chose this article because it's really funny to see leftists such as these lose their minds. But the bigger story is, well, which isn't exactly a story in itself if you at least understand at the surface level how the US functions. The Supreme Court judges, they've interpreted the Constitution exactly the way it is. It's not something just like Olbermann says that apparently they can't read comprehension, and it's even funnier when if we are to look at the composition of the Supreme Court, well, yes, at least the balance of powers between those judges that you would consider that you consider on the right and those that you would consider on the left, leaving aside Chief Justice Roberts, which sways in one direction or another. They gave Trump the unanimous vote in favor. Well, at least not to Trump directly, but in Trump's case, as objected by the Colorado Supreme Court. And yeah, they're right in their judgment. If you understand at the basic level the U.S. Constitution, the states cannot do that. But you want to know what would have happened if this ruling wouldn't have went this way, and in a parallel universe when people like Olbermann would actually get what they wanted? Last time that a candidate for the federal position known as the President of the United States got struck off the ballots in states of the Union, it ended up being not long after an all-out civil war. I'm pretty sure Olbermann isn't thinking about potential consequences that far into the future if something like this would have ended up happening, if the SCOTUS wouldn't have ruled the way it did. Even the left-leaning Supreme Court justices are very aware about this, which is why absolutely nobody objected. And even if you are to read the 20-page ruling, they they've understood this part pretty clearly. And overall, the Supreme Court in the US, ever since the days of Justice Scalia, has been running as an originalist Supreme Court, judging cases, looking as clear as possible as to how those things function when looking at the Constitution. That's also why when uh, when Roe v. Wade got overturned in the Supreme Court, even late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has advised the Democrats for so many years, telling them before she died that if they're going to rely on maintaining Roe v. Wade the way it is, well, you better make it into a law, into a federal law as soon as possible. Otherwise, at some point, the ruling will be overturned. And who would have thought the ruling got overturned? The ruling got overturned, and the justification was pretty clear. Um, the the Roe v. Wade decision, well, it was something which, of course, it was a ruling that came from a completely different generation of justices at SCOTUS. But at the same time, it was also a very perverted view of the issue from a constitutional perspective. When and the SCOTUS did exactly what was ordained by the Constitution to do, which is to leave this situation with the right to abortion and another things next to that at the decision of the states, as it was normally meant to be. It wasn't exactly an attack against women or an attack against abortion. No, they didn't do that at all. They just transferred back the decision on how to handle this issue to each state of the 50 which comprise the Union. As it should have always been, but it hasn't been like that for a myriad of reasons. But that's exactly how the Supreme Court functions. The, there's more on saying that the Supreme Court is betraying America. Either he is way too deep with what he said in his own ass to the level where he can't exactly see how the world around him functions, or he really is malintended and he's doing all this noise intentionally for one reason or another. But looking at least from the perspective of the online, just how much people on the left have been as blasted by this SCOTUS decision. It's as I mentioned in a previous podcast, discussing on a topic like this, the polarization has gotten to levels which we've never seen before, at least in recent history. And people who do active manipulation in order to keep these people as divided and as insane as they are, that's going to come and bite them back in the ass at some point in time. I still wouldn't say how exactly would the U.S. elections go. Who knows whether it will go into Trump's favor or whether it will go to whoever the Democrats decide. At least now we know with Super Tuesday that Trump himself has really high chances of uh, of becoming the Republican National Congress's frontrunner. But there's still a long way up until we will see which way the things will go. And just the fact that Trump lost in the previous election doesn't mean that he can't be again. elected the President of the United States. Reagan got elected the same way. Nixon got elected almost the same way. It's not something unheard of for there to be a pause between the cycles of having a Republican president or having a Democrat president for 2 terms, and then whoever comes after them from the other political party to go again for another 2 electoral cycles. So that will be in total for 8 years until things change. O- Overall, you get the idea. This in itself is an important win for Trump because even other states within the union are looking at this, particularly since there were 30 states that had a motion in one way or another to try to take Trump off the ballot, which is at the level of the country quite surprising. Out of 50 states to have 30 try in one way or another take you off the ballot, that is quite something. In Back when Lincoln got struck off the ballot before the Civil War began, and the southern U.S. seceded, there were much less states back then, of course, as an absolute number, but there were also, as a proportion, much less states where the how do you call it? Where Lincoln got struck off the ballot in order for him to not end up getting elected in those Southern Democrat states. And we know in history how things ended up being. Now at least it's not the case. Hopefully the remaining states will not pull something just as stupid as this. It remains to be seen. We got no idea. Moving on now to the developing situation in and related to the war in Ukraine. The Guardian. British soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, says German military leak. Kremlin claims audio officers discussing the UK help with missiles shows involvement of collective West. British soldiers are on the ground in Ukraine helping Kyiv's forces fire long-range Storm Shadow missiles, according to a leak in Russian media of a top-secret call involving German Air Force officers. The Kremlin said the leak demonstrated the direct involvement of the collective West in the war in Ukraine, while former British defense ministers expressed frustration with the German military in response to the revelations. Released on Friday by the editor of Kremlin-controlled news channel RT, Margarita Simonian, the audio recording, confirmed as authentic by Germany, captures Luftwaffe officers discussing how Berlin's Taurus missiles could be used to try to blow up the Kerch Bridge connecting Russia with occupied Crimea. During the conversations, Lieutenant General Ingo Gerhardt, the head of the Luftwaffe, describes how Britain works with Ukraine on deploying Storm Shadow missiles against targets up to 150 miles behind Russian lines. When it comes to mission planning, the German commander says, I know how the English do it, they do it completely in reachback. They also have a few people on the ground, they do that, the French don't. Reachback is a military term to describe how intelligence, equipment and support from the rear is brought forward to units deployed on the front, but Gerhardt suggests the British approach is deeper, involving support on site. The Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said the leaked conversations once again highlight the direct involvement of the collective West in the conflict in Ukraine, although on Sunday Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, accused Moscow of waging an information war against the West. Nevertheless, the authenticity of the 38-minute conversation, which took place a fortnight ago on the relatively insecure WebEx platform, is not being doubted. It appears to have been hacked and recorded by Russian actors who passed it on to the editor of RT to release on Telegram on Friday. Tobias Ellwood, a former UK junior defense minister, said the leak was embarrassing to Berlin, although he told the BBC that Russia probably knew about the British presence given the intensity of its espionage activities. But that should not prevent some serious conversations taking place in the diplomatic corridors between Germany and Britain, and indeed NATO, as well as to why this happened in the first place, Elwood added. Britain confirmed the presence of a small number of personnel in Ukraine on Tuesday last week, although it did not say what tasks they were undertaking amid concerns of any potential combat movement could be considered as escalatory by Moscow. That followed a surprise statement by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz last Monday, who said he would not provide Taurus missiles to Ukraine because it would require the presence of Germans to match the British and French and be engaged in the way to target control and accompanying target control. That, he warned, risked making Berlin a participant in the war, even if such soldiers were based in Germany. German soldiers can at no point and in no place be linked with the targets that this system, the Taurus, reaches, he added. On the recording, Gerhardt and 3 other German officers are discussing the Chancellor's refusal and how it may be possible to get around it before a 30-minute meeting the Air Force Chief has with the Defense Minister Pistorius. They complained that a German journalist, said to be close to Scholz, had been briefed that Taurus is not effective. They come to the conclusion that a speedy delivery and the use of the missiles in the immediate future would only be possible if German officers were involved. Taurus training for Ukrainian soldiers to avoid putting German soldiers on Ukrainian soil was a possibility, but it will take months of preparation. Taurus missiles have a longer maximum range than Storm Shadow and Scalp, their French equivalents, of 300 miles. On the call, the German officers discussed potential target types for the Taurus, including a bridge in the east that is said to be difficult to reach with pillars that are relatively small. The description matches the strategic Kerch Bridge, a key supply route to Russian-occupied Crimea, which, despite numerous attempts to bomb it, the Ukrainians have so far been unable to destroy. They conclude it could be technically feasible to blow up the bridge, but it may take 10 to 20 missiles. Roderick Kieswetter, the opposition Christian Democrats defense expert, said Russia had leaked the meeting at this moment in time to specifically undermine a German Taurus delivery. He suggested the leak was carried out in order to divert public conversation away from other issues, including the death of Alexei Navalny. That is true to some extent. The current Russian mass media has quite a lot of issues trying to bury down the story of Alexei Navalny as deep as possible towards the Russian population. It also doesn't help the chaos that ensued right after his death with that stunt where they, as it is also the religious custom, when any person dies in prison, you must give the body back to the family in order for them uh, to allow the family to go through the funeral rites and to also bury the said person in the ground. They experienced quite a lot of backlash on this topic when they tried to convince Alexei Navalny's mother that the body has to stay for 12 or 13 days in the prison complex in order to go some sort of chemical expertise. She outright refused that. She also had this quite significant public backing, which was very upset at this decision. She also made a video dedicated directly to Vladimir Putin about this. But once this issue was over, another issue came up. She was manipulated into trying to get convinced to bury her son in that city, which is close to that prison complex. I don't remember what name it's got right now, but very far from Moscow altogether. That decision was also met with quite significant public backlash. So the state conceded and let Navalny's mother to carry out the funeral at a church in Moscow. What the government did rightly expect was that tens of thousands of people attended that funeral and also went went with the what would you call it? Went with the funeral as well, all the way to the cemetery once the funeral mass was over. And they also had quite a lot of controversial by Russian standards messages being shouted at the said funeral. Things like uh, no to war, and also saying that Ukrainians are not bad people and they're not our enemies. Things that looked like very bad optics if the Russian mass media didn't try to detract the conversation away from Navalny's funeral and all the controversies which yes the Russian state themselves shoved themselves into by trying to block all the processes of Navalny's mother to just bury her son away. And yeah, part of this is true. This intercept, yes, it's being confirmed as legit, and there is no way to contest that. Mm, one of its main purposes was to detract the public discourse away from Navalny and back towards the war and how evil and how deeply involved the collective West is. It's true that such an action from German defense is absolutely inexcusable. In what way, shape, or form do you carry out such sensible conversations over unsecure channels? And even if you do it, I'm pretty sure even as much as the German deep state has a lot of Russian agents and informers working for the FSB. This is still not an excuse to not take the necessary measures to prevent such leaks from happening, especially since leaks like these they not only reflect bad on you, but you're also giving away quite sensitive information about what other countries are doing on the ground in Ukraine. This fact with the collective West involvement is something that the Russians have known for quite a while. The British themselves said that Russian intelligence is aware of how involved the British are. Now, at some point, the French will also send their own troops in Ukraine on the ground, also as a supportive role. Plus, in the last podcast, we've discussed a quite lengthy article from the New York Times about how deeply involved American intelligence has been ever since the beginning of the war that started with the annexation of Crimea, and particularly the size of the operations that are going now from an intelligence point of view, happening in Ukraine with the direct assistance of well, yes, the CIA, but also the DIA. And you got to make sure that part of those two, it's also British intelligence being part of it, and the Russians know about this. So overall, I'm not exactly sure what the Germans will be doing. There will be some pretty spicy interactions, definitely behind the scenes about this leak, and yeah, this does truly threaten the position of the German state in order not to send Taurus missiles and supporting staff to Ukraine in order to assist with the targeting. Yes, from this point of view, the Luftwaffe and Lieutenant General is absolutely right that yes, it is a small target, but it's an essential target simply because and this is something that has been discussed at length in the beginning stages of the war. That's the main connection point between from a logistic point of view between the Russian Federation and the Crimean Peninsula, and from that bridge, because it's not exactly a single bridge, it's actually two bridges, one which is a road bridge and the other one which is a rail bridge. The destruction of the rail bridge itself is the most important because that represents the bulk of the logistical power and the main logistical channel to which the Russian military tends to bring in order to support their own side of the war effort. And even though from this point of view, the Ukrainians are doing as best as they can, trying to hit ammo dumps or other railways, especially in southern Ukraine, but also in the Donbass. They're also quite limited, and not limited, but limiting themselves at not hitting too much of their own railway, essentially, because when it comes to organize a counterattack, they will need themselves that railway in order to move as efficiently as possible and as fast as possible uh, the logistical support. And if they were to destroy it but right now, yes, they will be making gains since they will be choking the Russians when the Ukrainians will be again on the offensive. But later on, they will also choke themselves because said railway would also have to be repaired if they want to use it. And if you turn it into smithereens, uh, that can be quite a difficult ordeal and quite a risky ordeal as well, because again, in looking at the topography and the geography of southern Ukraine, it's a gigantic plain, and everybody can see what you're doing. When it comes to repairing rail, that's not something that you can do overnight. No matter how many people and how many resources do you employ, it's not something that you can do overnight in order to not get spotted. Not in such an environment, especially. And but somehow the logistical connection still has to be cut. And the Ukrainians had a temporary success when they blew up that fuel train, which was crossing the Kerch Bridge. What was it, a year and a bit ago? And that was good. They did put a temporary stop up until the bridge itself got repaired. But the reason why the Ukrainians decided on the Kerch Bridge, not because yes, it is the most important logistical connection between Russia and the Crimean Peninsula, but at the same time, it's also the connection that they don't need. If they cut that one off, Crimea is also cut off, and meaning that they won't have to go through this compromising process of trying to destroy what essentially is their own infrastructure in order to experience problems related to the rail infrastructure getting blown up. And they did manage to blow up as much as they could have in the first stages of the war. That's why all the rail connections in the initial stages of the war with Russia were cut, and they were cut in such a way that it took the Russians a while to repair them, and even when they managed to repair some, a lot of places are still under direct threat from either artillery or rocket fire from the Ukrainian side, which also puts in danger the railway battalions of the Russian military. Now, overall, I'm not exactly sure what will happen when it comes to Germany. I personally wish that yes, this Christian Democrat defense advisor would be right that that this is a Russian bluff in order to detract the larger German state to not send offensive assistance in Ukraine. But at the same time, already as we all know, the position of the German state, especially since Olaf Scholz, since he was young, um, he was essentially yes, a useful idiot for the East German intelligence, and of course the aforementioned entrenched Russian operatives and and informers for Russian intelligence in the German state itself. While the Germans do have at least some useful things, I'm not exactly sure if they would actually push forward with this thing, knowing how bought and sold and how traitorous the members of the state itself are into. And since the political makeup of the Bundestag being the way it is, that's what just makes it even worse, especially since their main their main competition being AFD. The AFD as well has been running on this platform of not getting involved in the war. So if the current German political class in this part of the cycle gets even more involved, that means more wins for them. Well, truth be told, already the AFD are winning without the German state doing anything. So what the current German establishment tries to do is to at least stave off as much as possible the growth of AFD. Now, moving on to the other smaller scale war that's going on, Breitbart. UN report confirms Hamas committed rape against Israelis and hostages. The United Nations released a report Monday that confirmed Israeli accusations that Hamas terrorists committed rape in their attack on the 7th of October 2023 and added that they are also committing sexual violence against Israeli hostages. UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict Pramila Patten visited Israel to collect evidence and reported that there was clear and convincing evidence corroborating Israeli accusations of rape by Hamas in 3 locations. Patten's report states, based on the information gathered by the mission team from multiple and independent sources, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred during the 7th of October attacks in multiple locations across Gaza periphery, including rape and gang rape, in at least 3 locations. Across the various locations of the 7th of October attacks, the mission team found that several fully naked or partially naked bodies from the waist down were recovered, mostly women, with hands tied and shot multiple times, often in the head. Although circumstantial, such a pattern of undressing and restraining of victims may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence. At the Nova Music Festival and its surroundings, there are reasonable grounds to believe that multiple incidents of sexual violence took place, with victims being subjected to rape or gang rape, and then killed or killed while being raped. Credible sources described finding murdered individuals, mostly women, whose bodies were naked from their waist down and some totally naked, tied with their hands behind their backs, many of whom were shot in the head. On Roll 232, credible information based on witness accounts describe an incident of the rape of 2 women by armed elements. Other reported instances of rape could not be verified in the time allotted. The mission team also found a pattern of bound naked or partially naked bodies from the waist down, in some cases tied to structures including trees and poles, along Road 232. In Kibbutz Re'im, the mission team further verified an incident of the rape of a woman outside of a bomb shelter and heard of other allegations of rape that could not yet be verified. With respect to hostages, the mission team found clear and convincing information that some have been subjected to various forms of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and sexualized torture and sexualized cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and it also has reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may be ongoing. The report said that it could not find evidence of some widely circulated claims of sexual violence, including a claim that terrorists ripped open a pregnant woman's belly and stabbed her unborn child. It also found some other claims lacked evidence while affirming broader claims. In addition, Patton claimed that some Palestinians detained by Israeli security forces had been subject to sexual abuse, a claim Israel has denied, stating that no complaints have been filed and that Israel will probe any such claims. The Palestinian claims included invasive body searches and prolonged forced nudity. Israel has defended the practice of requiring terror detainees to undress to make sure that they are not wearing explosive suicide vests or belts. Israel recalled its UN ambassador Gilad Erdan on Monday, claiming the UN had downplayed credible claims of rape. Well, now you hear from the mouth of the same institution that sheltered a lot of these criminals many years in the past. That indeed, well, who would have thought they are actually the criminals that they've been speculated to be, and they've been warned by many people to be, but people just didn't listen. Specifically because of the Islamic cartel, which tends to hold a disproportionate amount of power within the UN. While true, some, of course, during a war, there's a lot of chaos, and some claims are exaggerated. But let's be honest here. Even if you do or you do not stomach this, there are videos available on the internet right now which have been published both by Palestinians themselves, the really naive Palestinians showing the things that they did, especially from within Gaza, where you wouldn't exactly get such footage from anybody who would you consider a special not it's not a special interest group, but an interest group willing to sway opinion of people in one way or another. Like, for example, how in this conflict Israel intelligence would do it. Israel intelligence released their own footage for the things that happened within Israel because it's part of their domain. It's not like you. Plus you also saw there are also videos of the very first moments of the invasion when the Palestinians cut the border fence and then and started in from the very beginning with that music festival that was happening not far away from the Gaza border. Not to mention all the other kibbutzes. Again, footage from the Palestinians themselves is present on the internet, and it doesn't stop just at just at the sexual violence, but also the sheer cruel way that they resorted into killing absolutely anybody. It doesn't matter if it was military or civilian, or if it was young or old, or whether it was a single person, or if there was a family with children. It, Particularly since those offensives happened at least in the kibbutzes during the morning, a lot of people were caught sleeping in their beds, and a lot got shot as they were sleeping in their beds. And those who were awake, and in a lot of cases, they weren't just Israelis. They weren't just Israelis. I mean, not all of them were Jews. You also had plenty of reports of people like either Filipino women or Indonesian women, or at some point there was also a guy from Thailand, which I lived which lived and worked in one of those kibbutzes, which also got murdered because he was considered some sort of ally of the Jews. But you also had a lot of Arab Israelis, which were murdered by the Palestinian invaders. I really want to see when this discussion will be brought up at the helm of the UN. So this one with rape and sexual assault this one is already settled. It has already happened. There is video evidence of it. Now there's analysis directly from themselves. It'll be interesting to see how this discussion will progress, because even the other ones would have to be approached at some point, no matter how much the Islamic cartel from within the UN will be crying and moaning about it, especially since quite a lot of the countries from that Islamic cartel have kind of gotten sick of being constantly sympathetic towards the Palestinians. The GCC countries in particular, little by little, every country try to build some sort of relationship with Israel, of course, also for their own economic gain. And Saudi Arabia in particular is the one that's most upset about the things that happen, because in order to not lose face in front of other Muslim countries, they had to cut back on the process of normalizing relationships with Israel, and from the part of other countries that managed to some extent to normalize relationships with Israel, like how it is with the United Arab Emirates, for example. They also don't like the fact that now they have to self-impose a shut off in order to not look particularly bad when it comes to the Muslim world for being some sort of Israeli collaborators, even if in reality they aren't. But the perception is there, and it has already been there for a while. Especially ever since the Abraham Accords, which Trump mediated, that discourse has gotten bigger and bigger, related to UAE being an Israeli collaborator. So mm, it'll be interesting to see how things will progress. I'm looking at this entire conflict. As I've said in other instances in the past, the Palestinians had it coming for a while, but with the things that they did on the 7th of October, they gave the perfect justification for Israel to go all the way into trying to annihilate Hamas. And yeah, Hamas has grown too bold, way too bold. Uh, Hamas is also way too convenient of an Iranian ally to keep check of, and this is also something that's really obvious as well. You look at just what Houthis are doing on their own domain, bordering the Red Sea, and you just say, and I just simply do not want the Hamas to get to the level that the Houthis have gotten to especially since now the Houthis are growing more and more bolder when it comes to their grip over shipping transit in the Red Sea. Um, One of the most recent examples, even though I didn't put these as news articles because I wouldn't have commented much on them, they've out of about 16 internet cables that were crossing and were buried at the Bab al-Mandab Strait. They've cut they cut over a week or a bit over a week ago 4 internet cables, and in the last few days they cut other 3 cables. intentionally, not accidentally. And just this morning, I read an article about how the Houthi rebels demand every ship that wants to transit the Red Sea to ask for explicit permission from the Houthi government in Sana'a, but also subject themselves to some really draconian searches in order to be uh, crossing the Bab al-Mandab Strait and in order to not get shot at. This also speaks volumes of, again, this is a point that, yes, I made it several times and I will not stop making it up until I see some retaliation on this topic. What exactly is especially Europe doing when it comes to this? Because the main the main actors which are hurt the most by the fact that ships can't go through the Suez Canal, and especially they can't even get to the Suez Canal from the Indian Ocean, is because you have those madmen boarding ships, shooting missiles at ships, damaging ships, or outright sinking them. What exactly are you doing? When are you going to, yes, to make an effort, you yourselves, to make an ad hoc coalition in order to address this issue? How much is it too much until do you really have to wait until until the consequences of having the shipping traffic cut off almost entirely? It will get so bad that only then you'll make something, or then only then you would do something about it. I'm not sure. No, sadly, knowing human nature, things have to get sadly to the level where things are already too bad in order for proper action to be taken. And while I understand that there are also other issues which are, depending on which country we're talking about, more pressing than the situation with the Suez. Yes, but at the same time, this issue with the Red Sea has to be addressed by the military. Why the fuck do you have a Department of Defense? Why the fuck do you have a Navy? You just let them do their thing. You, at a political level, yes, you concern yourself with creating the ad hoc alliance of countries which are affected significantly by the crypto interdiction of shipping transit through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal coming from the Indian Ocean. And then from that moment on, you just you just simply let them coordinate themselves and to decide on what's the best course of action to take when it comes to dealing with those chimpanzees. Simple as that. It's nothing so it's nothing so complicated, and it's also something which is not controversial as well, considering that how Europe doesn't exactly have doesn't have many trade relationships with Yemen, and with Yemen I'm not talking about Houthi-controlled Yemen, uh, but the governorate in Aden. At the same time, they may also get bonus points for forming a coalition which goes specifically against uh, operatives of Iran. From this perspective, especially since almost all the countries affected by the slowdown in shipping in the Red Sea are also countries part of NATO in Europe, that would also play in their benefit of taking direct action. It would also somehow show to the DoD back in Washington that at least European nations, from a naval point of view, can coordinate to some level by themselves in order to not be dragged and pestered by the NATO leadership or the US Department of Defense themselves in order to do something. I'm pretty sure Egypt, although it's not part of any of these, would also be quite helpful, also as part of an ad hoc alliance to resolve this issue, because it also hurts them economically to not have ships that transit the Suez Canal, as I mentioned many podcasts ago. But again, it remains to be seen. This is the situation as it is right now. God knows what is it going to be in the near future, or even better. It's good to pose the question, how bad things have to get up until the concrete action will be taken. Moving on now from this discussion with wars, we'll go further into Asia and see how techno-optimism ends up biting people in the ass. BBC, Paytm, Rockstar Indian fintech faces serious crisis. A small grocery store in India's financial capital, Mumbai, has begun asking customers to pay cash as a popular digital payment service, which it used until now, is facing uncertainty over its survival. India's central bank has asked Paytm, the company that revolutionized digital payments in the country, to stop all services offered by its banking division, also known as the wallet service, due to persistent non-compliance of its rules. The division supports SWIFT payments through the Paytm app, which has more than 330 million users. The Reserve Bank of India has reportedly accused Paytm of financial crimes, including falsifying customer information and money laundering. It has asked the company to stop accepting deposits into people's Paytm bank accounts or wallets from the 1st of March, although customers would be allowed to continue making payments until the balance in their accounts is exhausted. Meanwhile, Paytm has denied the allegations. In a statement, the company said that the Paytm app remains fully operational and our services are unaffected. The app can continue to facilitate quick payments between non-Paytm bank accounts as an intermediary, but it can't accept direct deposits. This will severely impact the company's wallet business. Paytm Wallet is almost like a bank account in which people can receive deposits, keep money, and make payments, all done by scanning a QR code or using mobile phone numbers as their identity. People can also transfer money from their wallets to their accounts in other banks and vice versa. Not surprisingly, the regulatory crackdown has come as a blow to thousands of small business owners who relied on the app for making quick and easy transactions. It has also left Paytm in a dire state as investors pulled out billions of rupees after the company's shares began to tank following the order. Industry experts say the move could be a precursor to the payments bank losing its license in the next few weeks, further adding to investor nervousness. On Thursday, RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das said Paytm had been given sufficient time to rectify lapses. The RBI action is always proportionate to the gravity of the violation and is in interest of systemic stability and protection of consumer interest. Action is taken when regulated entities do not take effective steps, Mr. Das said. A Paytm spokesperson told the BBC that the firm was taking the RBI directive very seriously. We respect the RBI's decision and are working diligently to address the concerns raised, the spokesperson added. Paytm's founder, Vijay Shekhar Sharma, once named as India's youngest billionaire, has been firefighting. He is motivating employees, calming investors, and assuring merchants. Mr. Sharma met RBI officials and reportedly even approached the country's finance minister for help. This isn't the first time that Paytm has run into trouble with the banking regulator. Since 2018, the RBI has pulled up the firm at least 4 times over a series of lapses. Srinath Sridharan, a financial expert, says that the central bank's concerns are serious. The RBI has used provisions of a law that gives powers to the regulator to rule in public interest. This shows the gravity of the situation. Paytm has lost the regulator's trust, he said. Launched in 2010, Paytm gained popularity after India banned high-denomination notes in 2016, a move that sucked cash out of circulation and boosted online transactions. People began using the app for a range of transactions, including buying household goods, paying tuk-tuk drivers, and even utility bills. Paytm saw big business investments by Japanese technology investor SoftBank and counted Warren Buffett and China's Alibaba among its early investors. The Paytm Payments Bank, which is at the center of the current regulatory storm, got its banking license in 2017. The bank can accept deposits of up to 200,000 rupees, which is $2,411 or £1,907, but it cannot lend money. It offers digital banking services, fixed deposits, and sells third-party insurance and loans. The bank has 50 million accounts, including those of merchants who accept payments using the platform's blue and white QR code stickers. Mr. Sharma has said that his company is exploring third-party banks to provide back-end banking support to merchant accounts, whose transactions contribute half of Paytm's revenues. But this would mean that the margins earned on deposits and transactions will have to be shared with the partner bank and would further strain an already loss-making entity. Paytm has lost nearly 80% market value since its stock market listing 2 years ago. Additionally, the company might face challenges finding a banking partner due to the regulatory hassles it's currently mired in. Paytm has been trying to reassure merchants through calls and messages, but analysts say severe restrictions and uncertainty is likely to impact the company's customer retention. Traders have begun shifting from Paytm to other payment options. Banks, including the government-run State Bank of India, have already offered to help merchants transition with new QR codes and point-of-sale machines. According to data by market intelligence firm Sensor Tower, Paytm app has seen a 20% reduction in downloads since the RBI ruling, while rival apps like Google Pay and PhonePe have seen a 50% jump in downloads, Reuters news agency reported. The bigger battle to fight will be on reputation, say experts. Experts say the ongoing crisis at the firm has raised questions about the efficiency of the firm's managing board, which includes finance veterans and former RBI officials, and that the banking regulator may seek changes in the board's management structure. They have also expressed concerns over controlling the interests of the founder in both the parent entity, 197 Communications, which houses the digital payments business, and the payments bank, saying the two are not operating at arm's length. The action against Paytm comes at a time when India's most famous and expensive startup, edtech company Byju's, is facing problems after battling a series of financial challenges. This has led experts to question the role of corporate governance in high-profile startups. It has also sent ripples across the country's fintech and startup firms. A group of founders have written to the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, and Mr. Das, urging a rollback of sanctions on Paytm, calling it detrimental for their fintech ecosystem. But Mr. Das has clarified that the entire system needn't be concerned, as the issue is with a specific institution. Now, well, while the concern is indeed legitimate from the part of the consumer that they would no longer want to use as the trust in Paytm has gotten down the shitter, to put it into very, very plain words, from another point of view, Paytm itself deserves exactly what's been happening to them. As I looked deeper into this entire scandal, this is one of the few instances when the regulator itself is right. The reason why Paytm got into hot water was because it essentially manipulated from the inside customer information so that they will give them much more lucrative deals, from the perspective of the company in itself, damaging at the same time the credit capabilities of the users themselves. So in this instance, the Reserve Bank of India was right to intervene and and make sure that this didn't happen with just any account. It happened with really, really lucrative accounts, and especially what the intention of Paytm was. It was simply to enact some sort of predatory lending to those users, and this exactly hasn't worked. While yes, the government is to blame from this point of view because in attempts to curb falsification of rupees, but at the same level also to discourage the physical corruption, plus to yes monitor to some level the financial transactions of people within India. They did cut the high denomination notes. Right now, I think, if I remember correctly, the biggest note that you can use is 200 rupees. Back when India had at one point even 5,000 rupees as a note. Of course, that when the country in itself also suffers from inflation, it suffers from inflation for a completely different reason than other countries. In when it comes to the monetary reserve of India, the issue with them is that they do not have exactly enough physical money to circulate, and when you have a country which is progressing at the pace of India, that proves to be quite a big issue, and that's why, to some extent, they the government has accepted this compromise with fintech companies. If we're gonna let you do the things in your way, that's going to be all right with us because we get some monitoring power as well over the financial transactions, but at least to keep things relatively civil as they can be kept, because yeah, India is again not a perfect country, and yes, corruption is rife at every level, absolutely everywhere, no exception. Even within Paytm, who do you think part of the board of directors are? They were the part of the board of directors. There are people who used to run in the past the Reserve Bank of India, and when they assisted favorably the company, of course they were, let's say, blessed with a really cushy and high-paying position within the company, of course, to repay the favor back, just as it happens absolutely everywhere in the world, as much as people continue to remain ignorant about it, but also simply not consider it as much as a big deal. Overall, this also evidences the dangers of relying on fintech institutions such as these, particularly since fintech institutions like these also have their own pressures that they have to withstand from the outside, since Paytm itself still hasn't turned a profit, and they sold the idea to the investors just as other tech companies did in the case of the US, where yes, so we're not going to pay you as the investors dividends, but where you in not getting paid dividends, your net worth will increase much more because we are really a company whose worth is growing more and more. This is sadly what happens in a post-fundamentals world. Well, not all companies are like this. Take, for example, another fintech company which a lot of people use in Europe, Revolut. Revolut, of course, it was a company which, for the first 5 or to 7 years since its inception, it was also a company that wasn't making money, but but it really quickly turned things around and started making money. And now another profit, if I am to remember what they reported at the end of the previous calendaristic year, their their profit is somewhere around the £2 billion territory. And then the company itself, I think, started first broke even in 2017. So in this case, it's all right. From a fundamentals point of view, this is a business that's making money. It's not a tech grift like how Paytm is. Paytm definitely does have also its own qualitative factors for working in the economic and societal climate it finds itself in India. But at the same time, when you go overboard and then you end up pissing the wrong people off, what exactly do you expect? Sure, some people who may be watching this may think that, well, in Ankapistan this is something that's absolutely unthinkable. How dare you regulate a private business like that? Sure, but Ankapistan is itself a utopia, and the real world functions the way it is. Since the country got founded, no, but since the company got founded, I wanted to say they knew very well the framework and in the field they had to play into, and to make decisions accordingly. And they thought, sure, through means of corruption, that such things will be looked over by the state regulator. It didn't happen to be the case. There is surely some other foul play in there, since there are other fintech companies competing against Paytm, including the state itself. And when you're faced with such exterior threats, your motivation should have been at least to avoid as much as possible such conflicts with a state regulator, but at the same time not give others reasons to start pestering you and to directly threaten your business. And now, as Paytm's reputation is kind of screwed, and its founder is doing the damage control as much as he can, I'm not exactly sure how will that function. Well, what can I say? I wish them good luck with that. We're gonna see how that will work. Remaining in Southeast Asia, the Straits Times. China's top leaders adopt measured tone on Taiwan at two sessions meetings. China's top leaders have kept the tone on Taiwan measured and succinct at Beijing's annual parliamentary meetings, despite a recent fatal maritime crash near the Taiwan-ruled Kinmen Islands that has increased cross-strait tensions. In his work report delivered on the 5th of March, Premier Li Qiang only broadly restated China's usual position on Taiwan, while Mr. Wang Huning, the Communist Party of China's fourth-ranked official, kept mention of cross-strait ties to a minimum in another report a day earlier. Mr. Li said Beijing will resolutely oppose separatist activities aimed at Taiwan independence and external interference, while promoting the peaceful development of cross-strait relations, language that has remained broadly similar to previous years. He was addressing more than 2,800 National People's Congress deputies at the Chinese legislature's annual meeting in Beijing, a key highlight of the two sessions, China's most important political event of the year. While it was unusual for external interference to feature in the work report, other Chinese leaders have used the term when addressing Taiwan policy in recent years, such as President Xi Jinping at the Twice-a-Decade Party Congress in October 2022. Mr. Wang, chairman of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, did not mention Taiwan in his CPPCC work report on the 4th of March, except in relation to an upcoming forum to promote cross-strait development. Dr. Li Nan, visiting senior research fellow at the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore, said the fact that the wording on Taiwan remained largely similar indicates that Beijing's current Taiwan policy will continue, including with a heavier emphasis on deterrence. China may also try to increase Taiwan's economic integration with China, to raise the cost of independence and to create vested interest in Taiwan, as well as wield economic stakes, he said. Beijing has continued to exert pressure on Taiwan since the latter's independence-leaning Democratic Progressive Party won an unprecedented third presidential election in January. China views the self-governing island as an inalienable part of its territory. In February, China stepped up Coast Guard patrols in waters off Kinmen Island after the incident involving a fishing boat from Fujian province that caused the deaths of 2 Chinese fishermen. On January the 30th, Beijing unilaterally declared an adjustment to a flight path that would result in Chinese civilian aircraft flying closer to the median line in the Taiwan Strait, which drew protests from Taipei. Dr. James Char, a research fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, said that, for now, the Chinese military will probably continue to stick to military operations below the threshold of war to achieve China's national objectives. At least in the near to medium term, the CPC and the PLA will be unwilling to call into question Washington's status as the incumbent world-class military power, or to unilaterally change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, he said, making reference to the People's Liberation Army. This is related to the PLA's combat shortcomings, particularly in combined armed and joint operations, which throw doubt on whether it can carry out a successful mission across the strait, said Dr. Char, who specializes in China's military and domestic politics. China's defense spending for 2024 would be 1.67 trillion yuan, that would be 316 billion US dollars, a 7.2% increase over the 1.55 trillion yuan for 2023. This was revealed in the Chinese government's budget estimates for the upcoming year issued on the 5th of March. The growth was the same as in 2023. China has mostly announced increases in the annual defense budget of about 7% in the last decade. During this period, its defense spending has also been kept at a relatively low level of around 1.3% per annual gross domestic product. Dr. Li, who has written extensively on China's security and military policy, believes that the 7.2% rise is restrained. The growth rate has always outpaced GDP growth slightly. If one counts inflation and a fluctuating exchange rate, there may not be a real increase in defense budget. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Dong Jun, who was appointed in December 2023 to replace General Li Shangfu, would likely not be appointed as State Councillor or to the 7-member Central Military Commission this week, as personal appointments were not on the NPC's agenda issued on the 4th of March. Previous defense ministers have held those roles, but Dr. Char said the lack of concurrent appointments would have little impact on China's military diplomacy, which the defense minister leads. Going through the NPC is but an administrative procedure to rubber stamp the CPC's key personal appointments to provide a veil of legitimacy to the party's dominance over the Chinese state, he said. Admiral Dong will likely join the party's CMC at the next plenum or Politburo meeting before he is appointed to the State Council eventually, said Dr. Char. Chinese military diplomacy has continued despite General Li's disappearance from public view since August 2023, he added. So another moment in another time, China brings again this discussion with Taiwan. Is essentially doing nothing about it, bar with harassing all sorts of ships within the new 10- line, not the 9- line. They finally added on their maps Taiwan and the surrounding area as well, as part that is rightfully land of China. As we've discussed in the news article about Germans and their leak and what the Kremlin is trying to do with the leak, this is also part from the same field when it comes to communications. China has been rattling the sword with Taiwan for quite a while, simply because they also have the gigantic issues when it comes to managing their country in the face of inflation, currency fluctuation, the way the country is managed, the inherent inefficiencies of it, and yes, the what I mentioned in the very first article, the post-pandemic reality of China. A lot of businesses that shut down during the pandemic didn't open back up, and considering how many people said industry is employed, it's a terrible situation because that means that not a lot of not when companies don't open, people don't have to work, and when you don't have any work, things like starvation become a legitimate concern. So one of the reasons why China has brought up this topic again is it's nothing too complicated. This article evidences clearly what I've been saying and what others have been saying on this topic, where simply put, the Chinese realistically cannot do anything to Taiwan unless they want to screw themselves pretty badly, but also screw the rest of the planet. At a military level, they're not capable of conducting the operation if they ever were to have this genius idea of trying to invade Taiwan by the sea. No matter how much hardware and how many rockets they put in the Fujian province, which tends to be the closest point to Taiwan. They are also plainly aware that in, with the political leadership in Taipei, they're not going to manage to do anything. So they go back to the thing that the Chinese have been done historically a lot in order to not save face from the outside, and especially for the CCP to not lose face in front of the population. They just keep on hammering this point with Taiwan rightful China land, which we're gonna do something, but they just have to say that they're trying to do something without having to actually properly do it, just to show that the intention is there. And of course, the worst thing, if they would ever have this genius idea of or no more, not exactly genius idea, but the master strategist here idea to somehow threaten Taiwan. They don't really want to see if the US and the rest of the Pacific allies are bluffing when it comes to what will happen if Taiwan gets invaded and annexed. Remaining with China, and I think this is the last article, yes. South China Morning Post. EU reaches deal on forced labor ban with China's Xinjiang in its sights. Provisional agreement would target sectors and regions profiting from state-imposed forced labor based on database drawn up by the European Commission. Unlike the American ban, which specifically targets goods made in Xinjiang, it will apply to products from all over the world, including the EU. The European Union reached a provisional agreement on Tuesday to ban goods made using forced labor, advancing legislation that was broadly written with China in mind. The ban, which still needs to be approved by the European Parliament and the Council, made up of EU member states, will target specific economic sectors in places where state-imposed forced labor exists, based on a database drawn up by the European Commission. China is not named in the documentation, given the need to comply with World Trade Organization rules. But the initial proposal was driven by widespread allegations of state-sponsored forced labor in the Chinese region of Xinjiang, which Beijing denies. Nonetheless, unlike a US ban which specifically targets goods made in Xinjiang, it will apply to products from all over the world, including the EU. Negotiators clashed over who would administer the ban, with its global remit expected to be a drain on resources. Commission sources on Tuesday said member states would need to afford them more staff to enforce the ban, otherwise it's just headlines. As part of an early morning deal reached by lawmakers from the parliament and council diplomats, the Commission will investigate company supply chains if suspicions are flagged outside the EU. Individual member states will investigate instances within the Union. It is appalling that in the 21st century slavery and forced labor still exist in the world, said Pierre-Yves Derman, the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, which holds the rotating EU presidency, prioritized the ban. This hideous crime must be eradicated, and the first step to achieve this consists in breaking the business model of companies that exploit workers. If an investigation finds that forced labor is present in a supply chain, authorities can demand the goods be withdrawn from sale and confiscated at the borders. Goods considered critically important will not be destroyed, but detained until the forced labor is traced to be eradicated. As well as drawing up a list of suspected regions, the Commission will identify products in which forced labor is considered a higher risk. In these instances, importers and exporters will have to submit extra details for EU customs, for example related to the manufacturer and supplier. Samira Rafaela, a lawmaker who led negotiations on the deal, said it was groundbreaking in the field of human rights. It will prevent forced labor products from entering our market, and it has severe references to remediation. It is a step forward in achieving fair trade and cleaning up supply chains while prioritizing human rights. However, recent history suggests its passage is not guaranteed. Last week, EU member states, including Germany and Italy, torpedoed a piece of legislation that would have required companies to provide forensic audits of the human rights records of their suppliers, including in China. The dramatic collapse of the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive came at the same stage of the legislative flow after EU members had preliminarily approved it. The Belgian government is now scrambling to salvage the law before the EU elections in June. Since a UN Human Rights Office report on Xinjiang in 2022 found the Chinese government may have committed crimes against humanity in the region, the EU has been under pressure to enact legislation on forced labor. Campaigners demanded that, like the US, the EU place the burden of proof on importers, who will be responsible for ensuring there is no forced labor in their supply chains, something the proposed risk-based legislation does not do. Adrian Zenz, a German researcher at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, whose work in Xinjiang has been widely cited by Western legislators, said it would better be to have no legislation than what the EU has proposed. In the Xinjiang case, it would be better to have no legislation because then there would be no illusion that the EU has done something. It is better not to have anything. If you can't do something that's properly effective, it's better to not have it at all, he said. The issue of human rights in China hit headlines in Europe recently when the German chemicals giant BASF announced it will prematurely divest from joint ventures in Xinjiang following reports that its business partners were involved in abuses. Pressure is mounting on German car company Volkswagen to follow suit after a German newspaper last month reported that what it said was evidence of the car maker's involvement in forced labor in the region. While from one point of view, I would be glad if something would be done in order to undermine China as an economic power. From the other point of view, knowing how the EU draws up laws and measures, I come to the conclusion of Adrian Zenz, the man from the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. This is, by the way this looks, it looks like something was done, a measure from the something was done territory, so that it would at least look not as bad for the current EU Parliament establishment at the following elections in June, since they've woken up and they've seen that there are high chances that they would lose the elections in order to not end up being the dominant force. Plus concerned, yes, with the current situation where people have realized more and more how much dependent Europe overall has gotten to China, and that is not exactly Europe overall, but more like Germany doing it. See the German problem again from this entire situation. So, in such instances, it's better to not have a regulation at all. Particularly since yeah, this is typically a good example of how ass backwards the EU laws are made and done. You put you as the EU put the burden on the importers in order for the importer to guarantee that there is no such thing as some sort of forced labor down the supply chain. Excuse me, but how the hell do you expect an importer to do that? Can you imagine just the amount of work that one single importer has to do in order to find out something like this? The first you will need first you need a person that knows China very well. Second is to have a person that can travel through China in order to not garner unwarranted attention. Just you as a white guy ending up in Xinjiang, that's not sufficient. Thirdly, someone who knows how China functions. Fourth being somebody who knows the industry in order to at least know where to start to look from. Fifth would be someone who has sufficient intuition to discover the hidden forced labor and the sources where it comes from. It's impossible to do such a thing. But the EU and its laws are a menagerie of laws that have been arbitrarily put into regulation with essentially impossible ways to comply to it. One good example about this, look at GDPR. GDPR, if you ask any small consultants, they will tell you that there's absolutely no way to be 100% compliant, and you'll always be open in one way or another to receive a fine which could bankrupt your company. Because that's also another perverse thing, the way the GDPR fines are calculated. So this will do more damage than good if it were to be voted, while at the same time not exactly resolving the issue, or at least it will pretend to resolve the issue, just like how GDPR pretended to resolve the issue with customer data protection. It actually didn't. It actually didn't. It's just part of the something was done territory. Um, that's about it. So now, as we reach the end of this, as I mentioned, there are only 8 articles because while there were truly others, I didn't exactly perceive them to be as interesting as to be worth commenting on. So rather than just fill the space in the podcast with uninteresting news, I opted for this version to put less news, but at least more interesting ones, and not just more interesting news by themselves, but also more interesting news which would be worth commenting on for you, the listener or the watcher. So, kind reminder, please like and subscribe this video, share it with anybody that you would consider that would find such sort of content interesting. Thank you for watching. As I said, I'm not exactly sure when the video about the role of the USA in the world will be published. I still haven't gotten to the point to write a transcript. I have a few upcoming really busy weeks, and it's gonna be complicated. But at some point, it will be done. Whether if it will be at some point before the Catholic Easter vacation, or whether it will be done after the Catholic Easter vacation is over. Thank you very much for watching, and cheers.